Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're in the Gospel of Matthew today, and we're going to begin in chapter 26, reading verses 26 to 29, the second half of the Passover meal, that which gets instituted as the Last Supper. The oldest written account of the Last Supper is not in a Gospel. Matthew, Mark, and Luke would have written sometime in the 60s, a decade earlier. Paul would have written 1 Corinthians, and 1 Corinthians chapter 11 is the original account, the primary account of what happened on that night. And of course, it completely agrees with everything that we're told in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Also, on that evening, something that happened, and in a detail that is important in John's Gospel for our understanding of the night. John's Gospel gives us chapters 13 through 17, in which we have all the words that Jesus spoke to them that night. And that's a lot. And also, we're given this detail at the beginning of chapter 13, that in the middle of the supper, whether it was between the meat and bitter herbs and the bread and wine, I don't know, or whether it was between the bread and wine. I believe it's probably between the bread and the wine, because the bread is at the beginning and then the wine is at the end, which we know from the synoptic accounts. But in the middle of supper, Jesus washes their feet, all of them. And so that interrupted the supper. So John tells us that detail that Matthew, Mark, and Luke leave out when they give and Paul leave out when they give us their accounts of what happened that evening. Let's read our verses, Matthew chapter 26, verses 26 through 29. While they were eating, Jesus took some bread, and after a blessing, he broke it and gave it to the disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." And he took a cup and gave thanks and gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is to be shed on behalf of many for forgiveness of sins. But I say to you, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine from now on until the day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." Okay, there's so much here in these 4 verses. When each item of the Passover meal would have been introduced to the table, and they are reclining. I didn't say this before. Let me mention this. They're not sitting in chairs. They're on their sides around a low table. They're reclining. And as each item was placed on the table, there would have been a blessing that would have been said. Is this the blessing for the bread itself, or is this a blessing that Jesus gives later? Because he says during the meal, Jesus took some bread. So maybe this is something that happens later. But Jesus is offering a blessing of the bread and of the wine, which would have been something they would have expected, something traditional. But this is new. This is more. This is something beyond. He's transforming this worship meal, this traditional meal that they have observed for 1400 years already, and changing it into something that they will continue to observe until he comes again. And he takes the bread and blesses it, and is handing it out, this flat bread, this pita looking bread, this lakash looking bread that he would have had, and would have handed it out, and tells them to eat the bread. And he said, "This bread is my body. This bread is my body. My body, which is going to be broken for us, and which is about to happen when he is arrested, which is about to happen when he is crucified by the Romans." And then he takes the wine, and he says, and he takes the cup. There would have been one cup on the table for the wine that they would all have shared. And traditionally, there would have been 4 cups during the meal that they would have shared. They would have had, for each part of the meal. When is this cup taken? I don't know. But he would have taken it, and blessed it and showed it around the table and then shared it with everyone, and they would all have taken a sip. And he says, this is my blood. And Jesus has already said in his preaching, after he fed the 5,000 and people started following him for a free meal, he already said, John chapter 6, you're going to have to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And they didn't know what it meant. And many people left because of that. Many disciples left because of that. And Jesus is explaining what he means by that. From now on, you're going to be eating my flesh and drinking my blood. You're going to be observing. You're going to be remembering. This meal of remembrance is no longer about what happened in Egypt. It's about what happens in Jerusalem right now, this night, and tomorrow. And the bread is going to remind you of my body, and the wine is going to remind you of my blood. And you're going to do this until I come again in remembrance of me. What Jesus means in verse 29, until I drink of it in my Father's kingdom, I don't know what day he's looking forward to. I really don't. And I don't know that we can identify that with any certainty. Perhaps he's talking about a meal he shared with them after his resurrection, before he ascended to heaven. Maybe he's talking about something that will happen at the end of time. I'm not sure, and I'm not sure that it matters. He's just telling us that God's kingdom is inevitable, and that all of us together, or at least they together, are going to be enjoying this in the Father's kingdom. That what is about to happen is arrest and crucifixion, not going to change anything. In fact, they're going to accomplish the very thing that God has planned all along. Well, thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson. We'll continue on next time.